Hey guys, so here's Staar Review Video 2. Last time we left off talking about the 4 religious groups in the colonies, and that's where we're going to continue today. So we have the Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England, talked about them last time. The Pilgrims, aka the Separatists, who established Plymouth Rock and wrote the Mayflower Compact, which was an important founding document. And obviously, we need to remember that important date for Plymouth is 1620. Now the Quakers, they're the ones who wanted peace and harmony. They were kind of before their time because they fought for abolitions and women's rights and even rights for Native Americans long before anyone was thinking about that. They established Pennsylvania, named after famous Quaker William Penn, so that should be pretty easy to remember. And we have the last religious group, which is the Catholics, who established Maryland, obviously named after Mary, which is kind of help you remember that that's a Catholic. And they have the Act of Toleration, which was also pretty revolutionary, since at the time people weren't really into tolerating other people's religious beliefs. So Quakers and Catholics are a little bit more progressive than those Puritans and Pilgrims. Now we're going to move on to the types of governments that were established under the colonies and how they sort of lead to our things like the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution that we talk about later. Now we have the Mayflower Compact first, which we talked about. Well, we talked about those Pilgrims. So we have the Pilgrims. They come over, they write the Mayflower Compact before they even get off the Mayflower, the boat they were on. It is a document just establishing majority rule. So hey, for the first time, we're not going to do this whole king thing. It's going to be majority rule. The next important government document is the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Hey, Connecticut. So this is the very first constitution in North America. And remember, constitution is a fancy word for the rules of how government should work. So over in Connecticut, before we even had our Constitution of the United States of America, they had their Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which was sort of like their constitution about how their government would work. And while we're talking about firsts, we have the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was the first representative assembly and the first concept of people meeting together to talk about government. When the Virginia House of Burgesses, there's Virginia, hey Virginia, when the Virginia House of Burgesses grows up, they become our modern day Congress, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Here's some other important facts at the bottom. Jamestown, Virginia, established in 1607. We have the starving time when they all die because they're looking for gold instead of farming. We have Georgia, which is established by peoples like convicts, debtors, indentured servants, essentially like, hey, you can go to prison or you can go to Georgia. Surprisingly, most people chose prison. And then New York is called New Amsterdam and is settled by the Dutch. Remember, all of these others are all settled by the British, but New York, we have the Dutch hanging out over there, which is from the Netherlands, not Dutchland or anything. Alright, moving on to our next page. French and Indian War, which is the first little war we talk about. Yay, wars. So, they're the French and Indians versus the England and the colonists. It's not the French and Indians versus each other. They're both on one side. So, they fight over what's called the Ohio River Valley, which is right here, in this little tiny place right there. Anyway, they fight over the Ohio River Valley, where the French are fishing, hunting, and trapping. George Washington kind of gets his fame here through his fighting at Fort Necessity. And good old Ben Franklin. Now, Ben Franklin, you know, he never was a president. Ben Franklin never was a soldier. But Ben Franklin used his charm, debonair, good looks, and cleverness to do things that really impacted our nation. First, here, French and Indian War, he writes the Albany Plan of Union, where he's like, join or die. And that's where we have this little snake come from. Each one of the little letters above the snake represent one of the colonies. And he's like, hey, we have got to get together. We've got to come together, all of us, to fight the French and the Indians. Because if we don't, they're gonna beat us. And then the first battle is fought at Fort Quebec. And the last thing that happens is the Treaty of Paris Part 1. Remember, I'm sorry, but there are 2 Treaty of Parises, one in 1763, and then one that is after the American Revolution is over, okay? So we have Treaty of Paris 1 and Treaty of Paris 2. Now, speaking of the American Revolution, let's talk about some causes. Well, first cause is, hey, the French-Indian War happened, and then they got all of that land. Hey, look, we win all that red land. And then King George draws that line that says, hey, proclamation line, I proclaim that you cannot go past that line, the Appalachian Mountains, and the colonists get mad. One of the causes, that's how one of those leads to the next thing. And then we have good old taxation without representation. At this point, to help pay for the war, Parliament starts passing acts. Hey, there's what I mentioned earlier. Proclamation of 1763, the Sugar and Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, the Cordon Act, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Act. As you can say, the acts kind of get old with the colonists. Then obviously King George is just being a jerk. And then we have the resentment of the mercantilism system, and then salutary neglect, which is just like they were used to being on their own. They were used to being left alone. So the idea of not being left alone was not exciting to them. And last but not least, the desire for the free enterprise system that they had gotten used to. We will talk about these events leading to the revolution next time. So come back with after having watched this video, and I will see you in class.